Welcome back again to the show that never ends. It's friends occasionally not disagreeing. The Fawn Pod, the Fawn Cast. This is Cody, and I'm here with another installment of my James Bond 60th anniversary summer watch along. And I tell you what, the summer is growing short. As I record this, I am down to 5 days of summer vacation left before I have to go back to teaching again in the fall. Ooh, these are again going to be harder to do once school starts, but I do want to try to get through these. And when I get up to GoldenEye, I'd want to pause and do a playthrough of GoldenEye 007 for the N64, which I haven't played in about 20 years. So interested to see if it's as terrible now as everyone says it is, but we will see. Today, ladies and gents, we are getting into the 10th proper film, our 11th overall, counting Casino Royale, of the James Bond series. This is The Spy Who Loved Me. This came out in 1977. And this is again with Roger Moore. This is our third movie with Roger Moore as James Bond. We're roughly halfway through his tenure here as Bond. Was kind of intrigued by the title on this one. And this one in particular has a song, which I'll talk about, which I think is a little different than most of the Bond themes as well. So stick along with me here. Are we going to check out a classic or some crap today as we get in to talk about The Spy Who Loved Me? As usual, we're going to take a look at our categories here. We have 7 of them for our movies. And this one's interesting. I'll tell you what happened with the score on this one when we get to the end of this. So let's start off with our title and theme on this movie. Now, I mentioned the song earlier. This is a really interesting one. This is a Carly Simon tune, and The Spy Who Loved Me is a song I had heard it many times, but didn't really know, honestly, that it was actually a Bond theme until much later. The theme song here is Nobody Does It Better, composed by the legendary Marvin Hamlish as well, and written by Carol Sager. So some pedigree behind this one, shall we say. Also says here in my footnotes I'm looking at online that it is the first theme song in the series that has a different title than that of the film, which I think is part of my confusion with this one when I was younger, because the song Nobody Does It Better, I feel like I've heard played on the radio as just a song. And typically the Bond themes are very unique and stylized. People know a Bond theme when they hear a Bond theme for the most part. Maybe with a couple exceptions, like you might hear a Live and Let Die maybe on the radio or something like that. But this one just sounded so different. It just sounds like a casual pop song, kind of easy listening type stuff that you might hear on the radio. And it's a good song. I don't know if it's a great Bond song. And that is where my confusion is with some of the rating on this movie comes in to start, because I'm going to give this a 7 out of 10. I do feel like it's a strong song. I feel like it's a pretty song. I just don't know if it is a Bond song. However, going for what they're going for, and I'm not going to say they achieved, but going for what they're going for here, The Spy Who Loved Me, there's a romance angle in this one, which is a little different than most of the other Bond movies to this point. And so the theme song, Nobody Does It Better, The Spy Who Loved Me, is mentioned in that song, I think once in the middle when it's quiet. It's a good song, but for us here, I was 7 out of 10. The title of the movie, The Spy Who Loved Me. This, I think, has a couple meanings here in our movie. One is this romance between James Bond 007 and the Russian agent Anya, which we'll talk about more coming up here. I suppose it could secondarily be, giving away part of the plot point here, but could secondarily be that the Russian agent had a spy who loved her that Bond killed. And we can talk about that more as this goes on as well. So it does fit. However, I don't know that the romance is entirely believable. And for that reason, I'm going to give this a 4 out of 5 on the title. Okay, on to our performances here. Our 3 categories again to remind you all. Portrayal of Bond, we have Roger Moore in this one, the women in the movie, and the villains in the movie. Let's start with Roger Moore. This is his third outing as Bond, as I said, and for my money, I thought he did a much better job in Live and Let Die and The Man with the Golden Gun than he does here as The Spy Who Loved Me. I don't know if it's the story, if it's the structure, if it's the way they shot scenes in this one, or actually just something with Roger Moore, but he seemed kind of more um glassy and like he wasn't fully into the movie for some reason. I don't know, his performance left something lacking, I think, in this particular movie. It wasn't his strongest outing. His dialogue did not seem as tight. His actions were okay. I don't know, his expressions. I mean, it's tough to act in general. I'm not an actor myself. It's tough to, I'm sure, be somebody who has to play James Bond, which we've seen three people try that so far. And this is really, I thought, amongst the worst performances we've seen for Bond so far. The only one actually worse than this, I thought, was Sean Connery in Thunderball. 11 out of 15 is my score for Bond here in this movie. Now, the women in this movie I had high hopes for because this is clearly going to be a film about somebody, the spy who loved me, and there's going to be some romance in this. And we've seen a wide range of relationships with Bond and women in these movies so far, from casual flings to one night stands to even getting married in the one movie and having varying degrees of feelings for some of the ladies as these movies have gone on. That was my hope for this movie. We do get a character, Anya, who is the Russian spy Triple X, is her code name here. And get this up here because I'm going to forget her name. This is Barbara Bach, who plays the Russian agent. And essentially, this kind of ties into the plot a little bit coming up, but we have a couple submarines that disappear and are taken hostage. And so not only is one American, where somehow they get James Bond on that, and also one is Russian. This is a copy of a kind of plot device we've seen earlier, but therefore both countries put a respective agent on this case, and they do work against each other at some points, but her performance was eh, it was okay. I didn't really feel like she was compelling as a character. She kind of flip-flops her emotions considerably, where she pulls a gun on Bond and then suddenly kisses him and then pulls a gun on him again, and then they go to bed together, and there's just some consistency issues with her character. She is kind of given a little bit more to do in this movie, which is something I always say I'm looking for the women to be doing, but it didn't, I don't know, it just didn't come across as believable. And she is one of the lesser women, I believe, in these movies. So for that reason, I gave her a 9 out of 15 for Anya. Villains in this movie. Well, let's start with the surprise. I didn't know Jaws was going to be in this movie. This is another of those iconic James Bond characters. Everybody knows, even if you're a casual Bond fan, you probably know Odd Job, you probably know Jaws, and they're probably the two most famous villains actually in the entire Bond pantheon, I would say. After that, maybe you have like Goldfinger or Blofeld. I don't even know. Baron Samedi maybe in that next tier, but I was really excited to see Jaws. He has some pretty good scenes in this movie, particularly some fights with Bond, and then using his teeth to actually chew on a shark when he's tossed in the cage. And he's proven very resilient. Buildings crash on him. He's attracted by magnets. He, as I mentioned, fights off sharks. He lifts up cars and rips a van apart that Anya and Bond are in. He is pretty compelling. Unfortunately, he only pops up in the movie a couple times, which I guess, you want to save those cooler side characters for those special scenes. They don't want to be in the whole movie. But the main villain in this movie is a guy named Stromberg, who ranks among the most bland villains we've had in the entire series. Thunderball maybe had worse villains than this, but he is such a casual non-caring, non-emotional villain that it's like nobody cares, right? He's just bland. He's like there because they needed a boss, but he's just about the worst villain I've seen in these movies. So unfortunately, even with Jaws being pretty awesome and stealing the scenes he's in, which P.S. he does survive at the end. They show him walking out of the ocean, so that makes me happy to think he'll be back, perhaps. Um, Stromberg's just really terrible as the main villain, and they're going to sink the villain score all the way down to a 6 out of 10, unfortunately, with this one. So we have some kind of rough scores across the board here, maybe like average-ish. This is going to be close. Whether we classify this as a classic or crap, it's going to come down these last two categories here, plot and action. Let's do the action first. Some fun scenes in here. We do get some underwater scenes. We do get some explosions. The Navy's involved. We get torpedoes. We even have nuclear missiles that are detonated in this movie. I guess I'm kind of including the plot here as well. But there is a decent amount of action in this movie. As I mentioned, we have submarines vanishing. We have a pretty cool downhill ski chase scene early in the movie. Then we're in Egypt for a lot of the movie, and I thought that scenery actually was really cool for a movie. Not fully knowing who Baron Samedi was, I thought he would actually fit really well in this setting over here. Just his look with the Egyptian background, I thought would be pretty cool. So we have a pretty cool base called Atlantis, which is Stromberg's headquarters, which is kind of like this tripod-y looking thing that rises out of the water and apparently has a huge below water size to it. A bath escape, they call it here on Wikipedia. But essentially, we get some fight scenes. We get, again, as I mentioned here, some back and forth between Anya Amasova and James Bond when she finds out that Bond had killed her lover at the beginning of the movie. And interestingly, she claims she will kill Bond as soon as their mission is complete, which is not really played up for the tension it could have been in this, because that is a scene that, a plot point that maybe they could have kept around and mentioned a few more times as this went on, but it was kind of like forgotten about until the very end, and then they did very little with it here at the end. All right, essentially, Bond has to go to Atlantis. I'm just quickly summarizing this movie, which also probably tips my hat a little bit here. But he goes to Atlantis by himself to go try to save Anya, and the Navy has to try to stop him, but even before that, they come up. There's this crazy plot in this where they are going to shoot 2 nuclear missiles out of 2 submarines, the stolen ones. They're going to shoot and destroy New York and Moscow, which would then start simultaneous warfare between the 2 countries. So Stromberg thinks, and then his plan is basically to rebuild this world after everybody has died, I guess, because he'll be safe in his Atlantis hideout underground. I don't know if that's his plan or what's going on here. It's very similar to our Secret Invasion podcast we just completed a bit ago. Bond eventually does get into Atlantis. He comes in on the bottom, and there's a nice little tense scene where Stromberg tries to fire a long dart gun at him underneath the table. Bond dodges, and then he ends up shooting through the pipe twice, killing Stromberg and shooting him twice more for good measure, which I did enjoy that because you never know if villains are dead or not. So I thought putting 4 bullets into this guy was actually a little uncharacteristic of James Bond. Maybe he should have tried that with Blofeld in the 3 movies that he was in. But anyway, everybody's happy. Bond rescues the lady as the Pentagon orders the Navy to start blasting away at it. They escape. This is where we get the fight between Jaws and the shark when Bond very smartly uses a giant magnet to hook onto Jaws' teeth and drop him into the shark tank. But Jaws actually can overpower a tiger shark because he's so big, intimidating, and strong, and bites him with his metal teeth. And now we have the very end of the movie. We're in, you guessed it, some sort of a floating device with Bond and Anya she picks up the gun and says the mission's over and she's going to kill him. Bond says, in my country, we get one last request. She said, granted. And then, of course, she doesn't shoot him and wow, chicka, wow, 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 wow. They get it on. So, as the Navy recovers the pod at the end, we see the two spies through its port window, and everybody on both sides is watching them essentially, and they pull a curtain down over them. So that's where they're at with the story of Anya and Bond at that time. That wraps up The Spy Who Loved Me, which is, well, it's kind of interesting. Let me give you my favorite quote from this. There were a few, actually. There was a really good one at the end, but I liked it at the beginning of the movie, actually. One of the first quotes in here is Bond was on assignment someplace else, and they needed him to come join in on this mission. And the double entendre here is, of course, he's with a lady when the headquarters is calling for him, and they tell him somebody needs to tell Bond to pull out. Yep, that's a real line in this movie. I don't need to explain that one to you. Ask your parents. But I picked that as my favorite line at the beginning. There were some other good ones in here too, but some of the zingers, I don't know. Some of the groaners, the puns in these movies are just meh. But anyway. Okay, now, as I mentioned here, action and plot, I thought the action was decent, so I'm going to give the action a 12 out of 15 on this one. And then for the plot, I didn't love it. I feel like they just did the American versus Russian thing. So this is really hot with the Cold War, I guess. Maybe this would have resonated better if I had watched this in the 1970s in the theater. But we had a really boring villain with a really boring plan, which was I'm going to kill everybody. Somehow I'll be okay. And then we'll move on from there. And I was thinking to myself, what? I don't know. This is just weird. They're pulling in. This is an interesting one because I had read online as well that The Spy Who Loved Me was a book written by Ian Fleming by title, and they took the title for this movie, but they took none of that plot. And I haven't read any of the Bond novels, so I'm not sure what that looks like in print form, but it's interesting here because the plot was just meh, 20 out of 30. So, this movie has some good elements. Particularly, Jaws stands out as being pretty awesome. There's some decent action scenes, as I mentioned in here. Theme is good. Title's okay. And then we get kind of those, action was all right. Bond portrayal was okay. Plot was eh. The women in the movie were fine, I guess. And the villains just really disappointed. Jaws was awesome, but this other guy, the main villain, Stromberg, no. So quick math here tells me that The Spy Who Loved Me gets a grand total of 69 out of 70, which by our criteria means it just falls short of classic status. And unfortunately, I have to rate this movie as crap. Which makes it our fourth crap movie out of 11 so far. And this one makes me worried, I will say, for the next three: Moonraker, For Your Eyes Only, and Octopussy. This one makes me really worried for those three because, as I heard and as our other host Joe has said, the Roger Moore movies do get worse as they go on. Oh boy, I'm real worried for Moonraker next. I don't know much about the other ones, but if this is a space one, we'll see. We'll see where this goes. I don't know, but for tonight, this is crap, people. I don't recommend this one. The Spy Who Loved Me. Apologies to Carly Simon, who wrote a fantastic song. Just not a great Bond song, perhaps. It's okay. I guess you could argue maybe it's better than that, but compared to some of the other ones we have, that's where we're going. So 69 out of 70 is our total today, ladies and gents, for The Spy Who Loved Me. And that's going to do it here for another mini review of our Bond movies. I should have time to get in maybe one or two more of these before I have to get back to school next Monday, hopefully. Everything seems to be crunch, 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 trying to finish up all my summer projects and think about fall projects I didn't get to, and etc. And then, of course, I have work on my mind now as I'm starting to think about all the stuff I got to do for that. So attention is divided. We'll see where we end up with all this. Well, if you like this podcast, as always, tell a friend. That's probably the best way to get our message out there and have some other people check us out. If you interact with us on social media, we really appreciate that. That would be our TikTok and Twitter and Facebook and Instagram accounts. Possibly we'll be adding YouTube and maybe checking out this Threads thing as well in the coming weeks here yet to go. And of course, you can stream our podcast anywhere you stream podcasts. As a matter of fact, we're basically on all platforms at this point. So check out Friends Occasionally Not Disagreeing. Big shout out to all of our hosts out there, as always, Joe, Justin, and Brett, primarily as the three that are here often with me. And then more infrequent hosts here, Dave and Blue and Matt as well. On our guest house we've had through these as well. I didn't plan it to be this way, but this would technically be episode number 100 that we have produced of these, which is really an incredible feat. I'm not celebrating and blowing my horn here because I don't feel like I should do that on a solo episode by myself here. But maybe next Monday when the new episode drops, we will talk about some cheers and celebrations here as we get to 100 episodes of Friends Occasionally Not Disagreeing. Till then, everybody, this has been Cody. Take care of yourselves out there, and we'll see you next time.